Hello! Today let's take a deep dive into Thomas Morley's seminal madrigal, April is in my mistress' face. The Italians invented madrigals, that is, polyphonic songs on secular themes, usually related to everyday life, like love, food, animals, sex, sometimes several in combination. In the 16th century, madrigals became outrageously popular across Italian-influenced parts of continental Europe. Meanwhile, in England, Thomas Morley started off as a student of the mostly church composer William Byrd. This is a picture of Byrd, by the way, as I can't find one of Morley anywhere. By the end of the 16th century, Morley had become a prolific composer and musician in his own right, as well as a printer and publisher, and, rather excitingly, an English spy in the Catholic Netherlands, which I can't imagine Byrd would have been very impressed by. Anyway, at some point, Morley heard some of these newfangled Italian madrigals that were all the rage, and he liked them so much that he began to import them to England, sometimes reworking and translating existing Italian or French songs, and other times composing his own, as in April is in my mistress' face. Since Morley was one of the first madrigalists in England, and since this is one of his first madrigals, it could be argued to be one of, or perhaps even the first ever English madrigal, which is pretty cool. The conceit of the song is a nice one. My mistress, or I suppose Morley's mistress, has a face as beautiful as spring and eyes as warm as summer, but she has an autumnal temperament and a cold and cruel wintry heart. So 4 seasons, 4 musical moods, all combined in a lovely little audience pleaser that lasts maybe a minute and a half at most. For teaching, you can usefully divide the piece into 2 halves, jolly spring and summer in the first half and more dramatic autumn and winter in the second half. But even if you have a choir that learns entirely by ear, it won't take you too long to cover the notes and rhythms. All the lines are quite singable, soprano and alto mostly a melodic duet, tenor straightforward enough, and bass, well, as long as you know your fourths from your fifths, you won't go far wrong with notes in the bass either. Depending on your bass section, you may have to crack the whip a bit to get them to match the springy and lively feel of the other 3 parts in the first half, because ideally you want to give the impression of 4 dancing lines, i.e. true polyphony, rather than 3 dancing lines and 1, bass section. The tuning throughout is not hard, though it's sometimes quite dependent on bass accuracy. There is one alto note, that sudden solo in bar 3, that may need some intonation work so it's nice and bright after the twiddle, but the vowel there is kind, so it won't be too much trouble. And you may also have to do a bit of tuning work on the final chord, which is a slightly quirky unison across 3 octaves with an unexpected major third on top from sopranos. Listen to it. Important chord, obviously being the very last one of the piece, and I would probably fine-tune it by rehearsing the altos, tenors and basses approaching their last chord slowly and really listening to the vowel and the tuning on the octave G until it's absolutely resonating. Don't be afraid to adjust the volume, build up the parts in different orders, and so on. The alto approach via the little turn is particularly sensitive to tuning, exactly as it was in bar 3 actually. Then once that's all solid, add sopranos back in and tune the B natural on top of it. My experience is that sopranos want to sing that B a bit sharp, but either way, the way to get it in tune is not to try to fiddle with the pitch directly, but to demand that singers listen closely to each other and align vowels and tone. And whatever you do, don't just play it on the piano and ask singers to imitate that, because as always with choral intonation, the piano doesn't help. What does help immensely with all this, by the way, is if the vowel on the last syllable of December is an R sound, December. This comes naturally-ish to British choirs, but very unnaturally, in my experience, to Americans. I guess it's up to you how far you want to drag your singers from their natural pronunciation, or indeed how jarring you want it to sound to your audience. I just thought I'd mention it. What would Morley have sung? I don't actually know, but possibly closer to modern American than modern British anyway. There are a few interesting corners with the underlay, that is, how the words fit the notes. As is the style with music from this era, it's often the unstressed syllables that get the little decorative flourishes rather than the stressed syllables. So you have things like my mistress face and Julie in her eyes ha place. And yes, it's pronounced Julie like truly, as you'll discover the moment you actually try to sing it.
And Julie in her eyes had,
And Julie in her eyes
There are also a couple of moments of bouncy syncopation, which are only slightly counterintuitive and not difficult at all. Though of course it's worth stressing that to the 16th century performer, they probably weren't treated as syncopation at all, but more like brief metrical shifts into triple time and back out again. I talked a lot more about this kind of thing in the video about Bird's Ave Verum, so I won't labour the point again here. But just quickly look at bars 12 to 14 as an example. When you have the modern bar lines, you hear it as some quite fun syncopation. And Julie in her eyes, place. But if you see it without the bar lines, which of course is how Morley wrote it, it's much more clearly metric modulation. And Julie in her eyes, place. Honestly, it's not worth fussing about this with your choir if they're not into Renaissance geekery, because there are only a few moments like this in the piece, and the difference in what the audience hears is minimal. And honestly, either interpretation is perfectly effective. In fact, the metric modulation one is probably a bit harder to get your head round. But if you're working with accomplished singers and you want to get under the skin of the piece a bit, you might think it's worth doing a little bit of work on swapping that modern syncopation for 16th century swing. And finally, a comment about this really unimportant moment, the alto F sharp to F natural in bar 9. Is it a false relation? Not really, it's just two different keys. If there is a problem with alto tuning here, which there might be, don't focus on the semitone interval F sharp to F natural. Focus instead on getting the F sharp in tune within that D major chord, it shouldn't be too bright, and then the F natural in tune in the context of B flat major, which is implied by the alto melody in bar 10. It's not about the horizontal interval in bar 9, it's about the harmonic context looking forward to bar 10. And that's the way to fix any difficulties here, by encouraging altos to conceive and sing the note in the context of the whole line. Okay, for the 4 seasons, I like to go for the following 4 moods. Spring, I think, unavoidably very light and dance-like every time the word April comes, and clearly 2 in a bar. Summer, I go a bit more legato to mark the contrast, so it's April is in, but Julie in her eyes, warmer and more legato because summer is definitely warm and legato where I'm from. That's the first half of the year done and dusted. Then you've got the passionate and dramatic September, and depending on your sensibilities, you can really make a lot out of that melisma in bars 20 to 22. And finally, I like to do a slightly spiky and crisp winter, but in her heart. Not overdoing it, of course, but again, just marking the contrast of the 3 crotchets on but in her heart. Are very different in style from the 3 crotchets on within her bosom. Dynamics throughout follow the moods and aren't overdone, except if you want on that September bit. This is a fun little song to conduct, and you don't need to do too much work. A regular pulse, 2 in a bar, not 4 of course, is enough for your hands to be getting on with, and your face can do most of the mood work. As for tempo, it's really up to you, but I would caution against going too fast. You can still enjoy the lightness of the opening quavers even at a very steady speed, and going more steadily leaves more space for the drama of September too. Oh, and don't slow down at the end. That's it. Short and sweet like the piece itself. Thanks for watching. See you next time.